The official definition of a muscle car, at least according to Merriam-Webster back in 1966, is a group of American-made two-door sports coupes with powerful engines designed for high-performance driving. That descriptor was a requisite addition to the dictionary, given the battle for domination between the American manufacturers racing to unleash potent salvos of automotive might to a domestic market that just couldn't get enough. The push for American muscle exemplifies the adage, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, a quip from a Ford dealer that demonstrated the powerful link between motorsport wins and public demand. This golden era saw heaps of sublime, powerful coupes flooding out of Detroit mainstays, many of which are just as coveted today as when they rolled off the production floor. When we think about the greatest muscle cars of all time, we're looking at all the icons, the kings, the best of the trims across Ford, Pontiac, Dodge, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Plymouth, and more. Many of our inclusions highlight the rarer models that are becoming valuable collectibles, often due to low production numbers. But increasing valuations are just one metric. Overall style and visceral appeal are just as potent. This crop of muscle cars is precisely what we'd stock in our garage, if said garage was an airplane hangar. We invite you to momentarily unplug from the nascent age of electrification and appreciate the unapologetic glorification of the internal combustion engine that the following models present. 30. 1969 Dodge Dart GTS 440. What happens when you stuff an enormous 7.2-liter, 440 cubic inch V8 in a mid-size coupe? You can't fit in other essential things like a brake booster or power steering. Given that the Dart GTS 440 could gobble up the quarter in 14 seconds, stopping on those drum brakes was an absolute nightmare, with reports of the car hopping sideways and violently shaking when trying to slough off speed, all while you wrestled with the heavy tiller. To that scary scenario, we say, what's the fun of speed without a little drama? 29th, 2017 Pontiac Trans Am Super Duty. Technically, this is a Chevy Camaro SS that the folks at the Florida-based Trans Am Worldwide completely overhauled. It gets a custom fabricated front and rear fascia, glass T-tops, and, of course, a hood scoop with a screaming chicken emblazoned on the hood. Under that poultry, nothing is stock. An LSX mill is dropped in, and a Whipple supercharger, and custom headers and exhaust, mated to a 6-speed from Hurst. All in, the powertrain is good for 1,000 horsepower, and the builders had a hard time getting it to stay on the dyno, estimating there's more than 700 pound-feet of twist at the tires. The cost? More than $150,000, excluding the cost of the donor Chevy. 28th, 1968, Mercury Cyclone GT. The Cyclone's facelift for the 1968 model year was substantial. Gone was the squared-off Ford Fairlane body, replaced by the comely, sleek, swooped-back lines borrowed from a Torino. While the stock engine in the Cyclone GT was downgraded from a 390 V8 to a 302, you had the option to drop in a 427 V8, which generated 390 horsepower. The rarest of the Cyclone GTs are the Convertibles with the optional 4-speed transmission. 2766 Chevy Biscayne. Don't sleep on the cheapest full-size bow tie. It's no slouch. By ditching all the fancy things like power seats, power windows, and cheaper carpeting and seats, the Biscayne saved a little weight. It also had incredible tick box options, including a 427L72 V8, which also saw the suspension upgraded with beefier springs, shocks, and roll bars. Or the even better F41 suspension option, which added an even thicker front roll bar and one in the back. Without hood scoops or any outward indicators of these enhancements, few knew what you were packing until you left them in the dust off the line. 26. 1964, Dodge Polara 500. The name Polara is a nod to the Polaris star, meant to spark excitement around the space race of the era. This coronet successor was a dragstrip dominator, particularly the 1964 models, which could be spec'd with a Ramcharger 426 wedge engine, good for 415 horsepower, or the 426 Hemi, good for 425 horsepower, though it technically generated closer to 550 ponies. With a full dragstrip tune, the Polara 500 was hustling through the quarter in 12 seconds at nearly 120 miles per hour. 25. 1966, Oldsmobile Toronado, Jay Leno Edition. Stock examples of the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado came with a 7.0-liter V8, offering 385 horsepower. But that wasn't enough for Jay Leno, who gave one such Olds the equivalent of automotive steroids by fitting it with a heavily altered aluminum, twin-turbo 425 cubic inch V8 LS6 that produces 1,070 horsepower. From the outside, this muscular Oldsmobile looks stock, but it's actually riding on a revamped C5 Corvette chassis and suspension. And while the original Toronado was front-wheel drive, Leno wisely opted to push all the power to the rear axle of his modified monster. 24. 1967 Mercury Cougar GT. Meet Mercury's most successful launch, the Cougar, with 150,000 built in 1967. Among those, 12,000 were gussied up to the GT trim level. Hiding behind those rotating headlamps is a 390 cubic inch Marauder GT V8, good for 320 horsepower. An upgraded suspension, larger brakes, wheels and tires, as well as a less restrictive exhaust, helped translate all that oomph to the road. 23. 1969.5 Dodge Coronet, Super B a 12. This mid-sized muscle option from Dodge was conceived and launched halfway through 1965, hence the odd nomenclature, and aimed at attracting a thriftier consumer with a need for Mopar. And the 390 horsepower V8 features a new at the time configuration of 3 two-barrel carburetors. Engineers also tinkered with a number of engine and suspension components to increase power and speed. The B in the moniker is believed to refer to the car's B-platform body style, while the Super is self-explanatory when considering the powertrain. 22. 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Back in 1970, a Mustang Boss 429 would have set you back $4,087, about $33,000 in today's dollars. With 375 horsepower, the Boss 429 could hustle through the quarter mile with a respectable time of 14 seconds flat and reach a top speed of 120 miles per hour. The model was only produced in 1969 and 1970, with less than 1,400 examples leaving the assembly plant. 21st. 1970, Oldsmobile 442 W30 convertible. Vying to compete with Pontiac's GTO, the honchos at Oldsmobile ginned up this 442 option, derived from the police apprehender version of its Cutlass. The beefed-up beauty has a 4-barrel carb, 4-speed manual, a dual-plate clutch, and a 455 cubic inch V8, making 370 horsepower. The W30 package tacked on extra speed and efficiency bits, including a functional air scoop on the hood, an aluminum intake manifold, and an upgraded cam. A total of 3,100 examples of the 442 were built, but only 264 of them were convertibles. 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am SD 455, a Super Duty SD. 455 was the beating heart of the 1973 Firebird, and while that wasn't a new engine per se, it had a litany of modifications to help bolster performance. These included a strengthened cylinder block with 4-bolt main bearings to help rigidity. This model variant soon became known as the fastest Pontiac ever. Stock, the engine produced more than 400 horsepower, but with a race tune, including a modified intake manifold, a more aggressive camshaft, and better headers. That SD455 could create more than 600 horsepower and 600 foot-pounds of torque. 1987 Buick GNX. Buick built this modified Grand National for only 1 year, and it was a test run, which explains the X for experimental. It was the fastest production car in the world at the time, with a 3.8-liter V6 that churned out 276 horsepower and 360 foot-pounds of torque, at least according to Buick. When it hit the dyno, those numbers jumped to 300 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque, more than ample to allow the 1987 Buick GNX to reach 60 miles per hour from a standstill in 4.7 seconds. For the record, that was faster than a Lamborghini Countach and that year's Corvette. It's no surprise that the powertrain was so impressive. Buick had help from McLaren, yes, that McLaren, to sort out the engine and suspension. 1971 Plymouth GTX. Plymouth couldn't name its asphalt annihilator the GTO, so it settled on GTX for Grand Touring Extra. Fewer than 3,000 examples of the GTX were built, and restored variants are currently fetching up to $150,000. Yet, of the total number manufactured, only 30 featured the Hemi engine, a 426 horsepower V8 with 490 foot-pounds of torque. 1970 Ford Torino King Cobra. When Ford wanted to tackle Dodge and Plymouth, reclaiming the King of Speed title from the Daytona and the Superbird, it opted to tweak a base Torino coupe. A select team of engineers added an aero kit, one seamless piece instead of just a nose cone, and fabricated a larger grille, which was closer to the ground to increase airflow. Unfortunately, what the engineers omitted, a honking rear spoiler, ended up leaving the King Cobra difficult to drive, particularly at 200 miles per hour. The car's hindquarters kept lifting in high-speed turns, making it unpredictable. Instead of diving back into development, Ford scrapped the project and only 3 King Cobras were produced. 1970 Buick GSX. Handsomely clad in satin yellow, the 1970 Buick GSX is a looker with the performance chops to match. The standard mill in the model was a 455 cubic inch V8 with 350 horsepower and 510 foot-pounds of torque. In case you were wondering, that latter figure represented the highest amount of torque available in any muscle car at the time. Now, GSX Stage 1 models, of which only 479 examples of the uptuned beast were made, command more than $120,000. 1966 Ford Galaxy 500. The Ford Galaxy 500 was both a popular sedan for motorists and a mainstay on NASCAR circuits and drag strips. The choice year for the model, however, is definitively 1966, when the new 7.0-liter Thunderbird 5.8 was offered by Ford. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. This homologation special from the Blue Oval only saw 100 units built, just enough to get into the NHRA Superstock Series. Spoiler, it won. It's a skunkworks project that was just magnificent. Power comes from a 7.0-liter V8 that makes 425 horsepower. Though, again, because everyone was sandbagging then, it's closer to 500 horsepower. A proper race car for the road, the Fairlane Thunderbolt ripped from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.7 seconds, and ran a sub-12 quarter-mile. 13. 1963, Pontiac Catalina. In period, lightened versions of the NASCAR-derived Pontiac Catalina dominated drag strips. The two-door sports sedan packs a 421 HOV 8 mil, good for 370 horsepower, and Catalinas from the 1963 model year are particularly beloved for their Super Duty SD trim. Already crafted with lightweight parts, several examples also feature Swiss cheese frames, making their power-to-weight ratio even more impressive. Alas, the SD program would cease later that year due to GM's ban from racing, but the Catalina will always be a contender in our book. 12th. 1970, Chevrolet Chevelle SS convertible. The Chevelle Super Sport was an immensely popular muscle car during production. More than 51,455 examples of the model rolled off the General Motors line, though only 1,100 drop-top units were made. These convertible Chevelles are now selling for upwards of $70,000 when in solid condition. Base power in the top optional models is provided by the RPO L34, a 396 big block engine good for 350 ponies and 410 foot-pounds of twist. 11th. 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge convertible. While the original Pontiac GTO was a powerhouse and a stunner, the Judge trim afforded unique striping, chrome delete on the grille, and a body-colored spoiler, visually ensuring you knew this one was spicier than its cousins. The Judge features a 400 cubic inch V8 with a Ram Air 3 system that delivers 366 horsepower. By 1969, demand for convertibles had waned, and only 150 or so examples were produced, making it the rarest of the top trim. 10. 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner Superbird. If you want a 1970s stunner that can scream to 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds, a ludicrous time for those days, and has a horn that mimics the Looney Tunes Roadrunner character, Plymouth has your back. The big block V8 with twin Carter carburetors officially produces 425 horsepower, though dyno testing showed that to be underrated, with the speed bomb actually creating 433 horsepower. Car and driver recorded the Superbird flying through the quarter mile at 13.5 seconds, running at 105 miles per hour, again, blisteringly quick for the era. For comparison, that shuffle is about on par with a 1999 Ferrari F355 Berlinetta. 9. 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. Fittingly, Chevy only produced 69 examples of the 1969 Camaro ZL1, so when one turns up for auction, it hammers for staggering sums. One recently sold for north of $1 million per Haggerty. With powerful but sleek lines and dog-dish hubcaps, this was the fastest production car to emerge from the Bowtie brand, with some Camaro ZL1s setting low 11 seconds in the quarter mile. It was also woefully underrated. Official specs noted the ZL1 was 430 horsepower, but dyno tests revealed it was actually 525 horsepower. 8. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. With a rear wing seemingly ripped off of a jumbo jet, the 1969 Charger Daytona was at the forefront of the NASCAR Aero Wars. It would rapidly devolve into a band, though, and those lucky enough to snag one of the 505 units produced were in rarefied air. In road guise, that 7.0-liter 426 unleashed 425 horsepower, while race-tuned iterations crested more than 200 miles per hour on oval tracks. 7. 1969 Pontiac Firebird convertible, predating the ubiquitous variant of the Firebird with the hood emblazoned Screaming Chicken livery. That decal wasn't available until 1976. This carbon copy of the Chevrolet Camaro SS was widely popular, and more than 11,000 units were produced. Eventually, the Firebird edged out its Camaro cousin in the Speed Wars, thanks to a Ram air intake that would help boost the output by 15 horsepower. 6. 1970 Dodge Challenger Convertible, RT. Dodge dropped its now legendary 7.2-liter six-pack V8 into the Challenger RT convertible, one of the first applications of the prolific power plant, and one that put the car in a fairly exclusive class. Of the 2,921 Challenger RT convertibles made, only 99 had that six-pack V8, and only 61 of those were built with a four-speed manual transmission. 5. 1971 Plymouth Cuda convertible. If you never want to see another Plymouth Cuda convertible on the road, except, of course, for the one you're piloting, opt for a four-speed manual, Hemi Cuda drop top. Only 3 were made. Why? Convertibles were out of fashion by the 1970s, and insurance rates had skyrocketed for big block muscle machines. That confluence of factors led to Plymouth only selling a dozen Hemi Cuda convertibles in total. As it happens, this was also the last year that the 7.0-liter V8 was offered. 4. 1992 Dodge Viper RT/10. What's a list of the best muscle cars without the 1992 Dodge Viper RT/10? A bombastic 8.0-liter V10 lurks beneath that elongated bonnet, offering 400 horsepower and 450 foot-pounds of torque. It should be noted that this vehicle offers absolutely no stability control systems. No ABS, no traction control. It doesn't even have airbags. This Viper is a true driver's car for those eager to row their own gears and willing to risk feeling its fangs. 3. 1965 Shelby GT3 50R Fastback. Bless Carroll Shelby's incessant quest to find the ultimate intersection of unrelenting power and uncompromised poise. The Texan and his company manufactured 572 examples of the 1969 GT3 50R Fastback, with that R standing for Race Spec, indicating that the car complied with all the Sports Car Club of America SCCA racing rules. You could snap one up at the dealership and be at the track, turning laps that very afternoon. One of the examples was the winningest car in 1968, when it placed first in 32 of 54 SCCA races. 2. 1969 AMC AMX/3. Arguably the sexiest vehicle on this list, the AMC AMX/3 was created after AMC executives stared at the Di Tommaso Pantera for hours and tried their damnedest to emulate those achingly perfect lines. To be fair, AMC succeeded. The AMX/3 is stunning. With its engineering spearheaded by Giotto Bissarini, AMC's AMX3 was also mid-engined, featuring a 6.4-liter V8 nestled behind the occupants' heads. The car is noteworthy for 2 million reasons, which is the amount of dollars AMC dumped into development before pulling the plug. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $15 million today. Only 6 AMX3s exist, edging the valuation of each well above $750,000. 1. 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake. Carroll Shelby was hell-bent on creating beasts for the streets, and the Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake certainly fits the bill. Only 2 examples were produced. Yes, seriously, and only one remains. The curvaceous blue beauty you see here. In 2021, it went under the hammer for $5.5 million. The buyer received a beautiful coupe with a 427 cubic inch V8 mill that Shelby ratcheted up several notches with the addition of twin superchargers. The resulting output, a positively violent 800 horsepower. Subscribe now and join our journey through automotive history. Let me know if you'd like to tweak it further.